Hello vinyl community, this is Mike with TCAT's Deep Vinyl Tracks. I'm going to do a video today in response to a lot of threads that are going on out there for top 10 to top 40 to top whatever lists. Everybody's doing them. I've always kind of been against doing them personally, though I do enjoy watching other people's. But I've been convinced, especially after watching both Randall and Steve Carlson's videos, top 40 videos, where they've mentioned things like, top 40 lists are good to watch because it gives people ideas about some, albums that maybe they missed along the way or whatever. And I thought, yes, and that's really where I pick up a lot of information too. So I'm going to do some top lists myself, a little bit differently, and I'm not going to be doing them by year. I'm not going to do an overall top 10 or anything like that, at least not now, mainly because my likes change from day to day. One day I can have a certain top 10, and the next day I can have a completely different one. But instead I'm going to do it by group at first. Mainly groups that I have, pretty much close to the entire collection or enough to show. And I do have that is the case with this first group that I'm going to do, and it's going to be King Crimson. Now, most of you know I've been doing a series on King Crimson. The last couple of months I haven't done it because I haven't been able to make videos as often, but I will be getting back to it, just so you know. But I thought it would be kind of nice to break in here and do a my top albums for King Crimson. Now, they've had 13 studio albums, and that's what I'm going to do is the studio albums. They have quite a few live albums. I'm not even going to try to rank those. But as far as the studio albums, number 13 I'll start out with is Beat by King Crimson. A lot of people agree this would probably be their maybe least liked out of all of them. I'm not saying I hate this album. I absolutely love it. I love everything by King Crimson, so it's kind of hard to say, this is an awful album, because it's not. It's a little harder for a lot of people to get, but it's centered around or based off of songs based off of things inspired by the Beat generation. And I'll go into a little more detail on that on my King Crimson video series. Number 12, I would have to go with Lizard. Now, Lizard comes from the earlier lineup of King Crimson, one of their earlier lineups, where Beat was released in 1982, Lizard was released in 1970. A lot of people place their early albums at the top. Lizard I don't care for as much, mainly because of the lead singer they had at the time, Gordon Haskell. His voice didn't really match the material. So the first side is a little hard for me to get. The second side is much better, as the vocal duties are split between John Anderson from Yes and Gordon Haskell. Plus it's a side-long composition, very well done composition. So there's number 12. Number 11 from 1974 is Starless and Bible Black. And sorry for the looks of the bottom of this album. I do need a better copy of it. But again, great album. It comes from my favorite lineup of King Crimson. The basic lineup being Robert Fripp, Bill Bruford, and John Wetton. Plus there were other people in the band at this time when this one was released. Out of those three albums, this one is the one that falls in the middle, and even though, again, it's got some great music on it that I really love. It's probably a little weaker to me than a lot of their other releases, but still one I enjoy. Starless and Bible Black. From the year 2000, we get The Construction of Light. Now, this particular copy is called The Reconstruction of Light. It's an album that has been redone from the original. A lot of people had issues with The Construction of Light being a little loud and heavy and dark. This one, I feel overall, is better. It has a couple of tracks that are not on the original, plus it's some of the tracks that are not on this one. The mix is much better, and I think it's well worth the time to get this one in place of Construction of Light. So this one falls at number 10. Number 9, Three of a Perfect Pair. I really enjoy listening to this album, mainly because of some of the interesting variety that's on it. I do love this album. Now, it's also worth it to look for the remix that was released on CD, because it has several more tracks on the album. And where this one is only two-sided, that one actually has enough tracks to fill up 3 sides, which even makes more sense to have Three of a Perfect Pair as the title. Anyway, great album. This was made during the 80s, during that time when they were trying to adjust their sound, and they did a very good job of fitting in with the 80s without sounding dated now, which makes this stuff great. And you can hear a lot of influence from current bands that come from that era of King Crimson. And number 8, from 1981, with pretty much the same lineup, is Discipline. This one is a little bit better than Three of a Perfect Pair. Really enjoy this one too. Nice variety on it. Adrian Belew, this is the first album that Adrian Belew did with King Crimson, and he really seems to fit in quite well with this new sound that they were exploring at the time. Number 7, we go to an earlier album from 1971. This is Islands. I'd probably rate this a little higher than what most people would rate Islands. It's mostly because it's a mellower sound. But I love this album. I think it's quite beautiful. There's plenty to love on this album, and I highly recommend getting a remastered version of it, which this is. Then, from 2003, The Power to Believe. This was King Crimson's last proper album. The Power to Believe is a very good album. Maybe a little on the heavy side, but there's plenty of variety here too. A lot of great genre-bending music on this, and it also tends to experiment around a little bit, but not enough to make it inaccessible. So Power to Believe, King Crimson. I think a lot of people, if they heard this album, would be surprised at how good it is, that they like this. People that have heard it tend to put, or that are familiar with King Crimson, tend to put this one at the top of their list. So their last proper album, even though they've made plenty of live albums and a couple of project albums since this is the last official King Crimson album from 2003. And from the last one to the first, number 5 is from 1969, Court of the Crimson King. Almost everybody tends to put this album at the very top. The reason I've got it at number 5 is because it just seems to me like it's been overplayed a lot, though I still love this album. And don't get me wrong, I think it's a masterpiece of an album. It just has seemed to weaken over time because of the overplay, the overexposure that it's gotten. Still a great album though, and highly recommended, especially if you're starting out with King Crimson. Start out with the debut. And next at number 4 is In the Wake of Poseidon, which was the follow-up to In the Court of King Crimson. In the Court of the Crimson King, sorry. In the Wake of Poseidon is a great album that to me follows quite well in the footsteps of their debut album, and also shows a lot of improvement in their playing, in the variety of styles that are on it. To me, the first half of this album almost mirrors In the Court of the Crimson King, while the second half goes off on other tangents, exploring jazz, harmonies, and things like that. I love this album, and actually find it to be stronger than the debut album. Oh, hello, Norman. There you go. It has to get in there. Number 3, Lark's Tongues in Aspic. Let's get that right. Love this album. I think it's a very strong album. And this is where the four-part composition, I don't know whether you call it a single composition because it's not, but there are 4 parts to Lark's Tongue in Aspic. And this is where the original part 1 and part 2 were introduced, was on this album. Both of those are instrumental, but there's also 3 vocal tracks on this. Again, this is that great classic lineup of John Wetton, Bill Bruford, and Robert Fripp. There were still others among the band at this time, but just a very strong album. You see the direction that King Crimson will be going on from this point forward, and highly recommend this one for those that are looking for, the music that influenced people in the 90s, and I think this one probably comes the closest to anything else I've heard. Another big influence of a record, and a lot of people list this one at the bottom of their list for some reason. I don't understand it. I put it at my number 2 spot, and that is Thrak. Absolutely love this powerful album, and I don't understand why it's rated so low among a lot of people. It comes from 1995. A lot of cutting edge music on this, the kind of music that you didn't hear a lot of at that time. Tool claims that a lot of their inspiration comes from the music that King Crimson was making at this time. And yes, it's heavy. A lot of people don't like it because it's so heavy, but there's a lot of beautiful songs on this too. A lot of beautiful, emotional, and softer and slower songs that are quite accessible. So it's a good mix of everything, and this particular edition of it has the EP that was put out just before this also included with it. And to me, it just fills it out even better to have that included there too. So I don't know, if you're a hater of this album, I think you should revisit it and look at it for the time it was recorded and the many innovations that were made from this album. I think it's highly underrated. Red from King Crimson is number 1, and that comes from 1974. Excellent album, and this is where you have that classic lineup again. John Wetton, Bill Bruford, and Robert Fripp. Just an amazing album, and even if they only cut the track Starless, which comes on this album, that would have still made it a perfect album. Just a beautiful, beautiful track, and if you haven't heard Starless, you need to give it a listen. That you also need to give this entire album a listen. Very strong, one of their strongest in my opinion, and one of their most influential. So King Crimson Red, number one on my King Crimson list. So there you have it, something that I don't do very often, but I'm using groups to kind of get used to doing these top lists. And I hope you enjoyed that and got something out of it. Let me know in the comments what you think, and let me know also what your top 13 or whatever studio albums from King Crimson are. Thank you for watching, and we will talk to you later.
That's all, folks.